Cringe, cringe, YouTube rewind, big cringe. Hey guys, what's up? It's the Culture Detective here investigating your favorite albums, and today I'm running late once again, and I'm going to do another album review. And today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite ambient albums of all times, Tim Hecker, Virgins. This album says a lot about me. Which is one of the reasons why I love this album, because it's very true. The album title is very much true. Alright, so Tim Hecker is a Canadian producer, electronic artist, and most importantly, ambient drone noise musician. And this is Versions. And before this album, all his music is actually pretty great as well. They are bleak, they are dreary, they are melancholic, but also very beautiful and poetic. And on this album, same applies, except the instrumentals on this album, they are way more vivid, way more direct, way more laser focused, and also very colorful. Once again, he takes these instrumentations and loops them, chops them, swirls them, spins them, fragments them, fractures them, sort of laying them all over the place, layering them. And even though this album sounds very disorienting and very dizzying and hypnotic and also meditative at times, this album is also very, very gorgeous. And a lot of the moments on the album are just so vivid. It gives you an image, but it doesn't really show you the image directly. It makes you see and feel and sense things that you would probably not expect from just a regular album or a regular track. Of course, a lot of the beds of instrumentals on this album are cloudy and hazy, but what this album really gives me in general are glass shards, crystals, mirrors sort of fractured all around me 360 degrees, and obelisks just floating mid-air. This is the album you're looking for. And even though this is an ambient album, it's not much that ambient. It's not like, Brian Eno music for airports or anything, because it's ambient, but it's also kind of noisy at the same time. And Tim Hecker just perfects that sound, and it's brilliant. The album opener, Prisms, is a fantastic opener because we are immediately hit and shot with these very bright keys layered on top of one another, so much so dense and thick, so that it becomes drony. And they're very bright, so bright it's like staring directly at the sun and slowly ascending towards the sun while not feeling the heat or get burnt off, because at this point you're just a floating spirit. And because the sunlight is so strong and you're feeling all the UV radiation, the drone on this track and basically every other tracks on the album are just clipping. They are barely standing on its own feet, and they're just clipping, distorting. And we also get shots of reversed pianos, which are really rich, but also four pianos, and together they swirl together and build up such tension and such heights, which leads to the second track, Virginal 1. There are two Virginal tracks here, and then there's number 1. And this track sounds kind of similar to Prism, except it's more stable. We also get these minimal piano phrases just being repeated all over and over and over again, and then they are layered on top of one another. And then again, it becomes super thick and super dense. It's actually kind of dizzying and disorienting. Again, the sounds on the track, they are clipping, they are distorting, they become very loud and then quiet, and very loud and then quiet all the time. And the fractured instrumentals, they sound like mirrors. They sound like mirrors where you're playing this piano in a hallway of mirrors, and also mirrors on the ceilings and on the ground, and all the sounds are just bouncing off of one another on the mirrors. Or it also kind of sounds like just layers and layers of memories, which are not arranged chronologically, just sort of thrown in together and sort of floating in the air. It's a very stimulating sound. The ending gets kind of quiet and it just kind of cuts off at that point, but later on the track returns in the middle of the album, Virginal 2. Anyway, the third track is Radiance, and similar to Prism, except without the shots of pianos and the swirly instrumentals, it's still a very bright, drony track. And this track is also very melancholic and also dreary. There's this sense of hollowness and space on the track. It actually kind of reminds me of the soundtrack off of Gravity, a movie by Alfonso Cuarón, one of my favorite movies of the decade, because of how dreary this track sounds. And indeed, this track sounds very dizzying and meditative. But afterwards is Live Room, which is sonically very different from the previous track, Radiance, because this track is ugly. It is some ugly, but also at the same time poetic and poignant ambient track. Similar to Virginal 1, we get some minimal pianos, except it's playing a different phrase and at a different with different chords, and this time it's played even more intensely. It's like whoever's playing the piano is hitting the piano keys on the piano so hard it's almost breaking apart. And then we have the synths, which are so bassy, so fat, so thick, they are distorted, and it's just scratching, skittling, just tearing itself apart. It's incredibly ugly, but also very, very sad, because listening to this track sounds like this old man who's about to enter heaven and who just went through his entire life once again after he died on his deathbed, and he sort of revisits his favorite memory in the past, and because he doesn't want to die, so he keeps on living the same memory over and over and over again, and that memory somehow involves him playing a piano, but he's barely functioning because he's dying, so he keeps on playing the few notes over and over again, trying so hard to grab back his life, but just can't, and it's really heartbreaking. It feels final. The swirling synths at the end is so gorgeous, so poetic. It's enveloping the mortality that the first few minutes of the track is, and then we have Live Room Out, where it sounds like whoever it is finally entered heaven and is living at peace. It's a very touching closer, also very airy. We also get some looming clarinets in the back, which have a great sense of presence here. Anyway, that was intense. Virginal 2, which is similar to Virginal 1, but it actually feels more mystic and sharp. It feels dangling. It's like Virginal 1 sounds like flowers blooming in the most colorful and lively way possible, and then Virginal 2 sounds like an unanswered question, an unsolved mystery. We also get some really loud looped synths at the end, which leads to the next track, Black Refraction, which is probably one of the quietest and most low-key tracks on the entire album, but it's friggin' beautiful. The pianos on this track, they are especially sad and lonely and dreary. Actually, for some reason, kind of reminds me of the instrumentals of the track Tinseltown by Billy Woods, an abstract rapper. Anyway, back to the track. We get some very faint, I wouldn't say percussion, but just rhythms at the back of the track, just ka-chung, ka-chung, just very quietly and gently. And at the end of the track, it's played a little bit more violently, and we start to learn that it is actually a guitar scratch, and that is actually kind of brilliant. Next track is Incense at Abu Ghraib, and this is probably one of the more uneventful tracks on the album, where it's a pretty ambient track. Sounds like a transitional interlude, but it isn't really an interlude. The track sounds kind of one note, even though I kind of like the chilling harmoniums, which also last on the next track, Amps, Drugs, Harmonium, which is slightly better than Incense, but it's still meh, not really the best palette sonically, and the ending kind of just cuts off in a very awkward way, not really all that gratifying. I do really like the pulsating woodwinds. It sounds like woodwinds, maybe it's just fractured harmoniums, I don't know. But afterwards, we have Stigmata 1 and 2. And these two tracks are probably the most disjointed and most distorted tracks on the album. Reminds me a lot of John Hopkins' music, another ambient musician. Anyway, again, we get a bed of pianos, and this time it's very, very vivid, but not as violent or as colorful as the pianos on Live Room or Virginal. And listening to this track sounds like going up and down the water, because sometimes it's just muffled up and sometimes it's very clear, and it's drony and bubbly at the same time. And for the second part, it's, you know, similar to the first part, except it's way more quiet. We also get some blooping harmoniums just bleeping out of control. The ending of the album is Stab Variation. Awesome song title, awesome album title. I mean, all the song titles here are pretty beautiful, simple, but holds weight and clarity, and again, glass shards and crystals. And Stab Variation is probably the most damaged track on the album, and even though it's ambient, it's explosive ambient, because this is a very climactic ending for the album. Not only do we get the clipping, distorted keyboards, harmoniums, and pianos, but also there are some what it seems like kick drums that are faintly rumbling, but slowly gets louder and louder and more out of control. And it's a very explosive ending, also very psychedelic as well. Sounds like a plane falling down from the sky, except you're in the plane, so you're feeling this strong pull of gravity, except the plane is spinning out of control, so the gravity is sort of everywhere and you're being torn apart in all directions. This is what this track sounds like. And yeah, this is probably the vaguest album review I've ever done. I talk about the imageries and the senses that I get from listening to the music rather than the actual music itself. But that's what I actually really love about this album, is that you may try to look for rhythms and patterns in music like this, but really they're just illusions. They're all just fractured, splintered, disjointed, and yet assembled so beautifully, so gorgeously. It sort of builds a flavor and a palette around these sounds, and it's fantastic. So yeah, favorite ambient album of the decade. My favorite track here is I don't know, probably Virginal 1 or 2, Virginal, both of them. And my least favorite track is Incense at Abu Ghraib. And I'm giving this album a strong 8 to a light 9 out of 10. Yay! So, have you listened to Tim Hecker's versions from 1 to 10? How much you rate it? Like if you like it. And subscribe if you want more. And thanks for watching. Also, I think I'll do Flying Lotus Cosmogramma for my next review, because why not? Also, Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and also other albums from this year, including Michael Kiwanuka, Yaz Ahmed, of course, Matana Roberts with Kwong Kwong, and Anamanaguchi with USA. Yeah, stay tuned. Thanks for watching.